That Friday evening, I was at a bar with friends celebrating two occasions at once. It was Misha's birthday, and I was finally starting my long-awaited vacation. We really let loose. Hard liquor, sometimes without any chaser, flowed like a river. By the time the bar was closing, many of the guys in our group were already peacefully snoring in various corners. Finally, deep in the night, the waiter asked us to leave. After paying the small bill and calling taxis for our completely wasted friends, Misha, a few other guys who were still coherent, and I stepped outside. The night air hit my face, and my mind started to clear. I tried to enjoy the peace and quiet, even with the groans of my drunk friends. When the last of our group, who had consumed enough alcohol to lose the ability to move on his own, was finally picked up by a driver, Misha and I said our goodbyes to the other two guys. Our homes were in different directions, so I started walking toward the park that cut through to the highway. It felt a bit sad to part ways, knowing I wouldn't see them for a while. Our work schedules rarely lined up. Someone was always on a night shift or away on a business trip. That's why we cherished these rare get-togethers so much. Despite the cool air, I was still swaying. I stumbled my way to my apartment building, weaving from side to side. "Hey, you've had a bit too much," chuckled my neighbor, Slava, who had come out for a smoke. "Let me help you." He took my arm and guided me up the stairs. "Thanks, Slava," I mumbled. You should come over sometime. We'll have a beer. You need some mineral water, not beer," he smiled. "Well, here we are. Open up." I fumbled for the keys in my pocket and tried to jam them into the keyhole. Slava helped me get the door open and gave me a gentle push inside. "I can take it from here, Slava." "Thanks," I said, thanking him again. "It happens," he replied. "Have a good night." He closed the door and went back down to finish his cigarette. I locked the door behind him, threw off my coat, and collapsed onto the bed, completely drained of energy. A sudden knock from under the bed didn't surprise me at all. Of all the things, I muttered to myself. This is the last time I'm ever getting that drunk. Blaming the sound on my intoxicated imagination, I rolled over to face the wall and closed my eyes. The next morning, my head was splitting. I was just as unsteady as the night before, and just getting to the kitchen for the first aid kit felt like a major challenge. After swallowing a few pills with some mineral water, I sat down at the table and rested my head on it. I started piecing together the events of the previous evening. I couldn't believe we had gotten as drunk as we did, only to feel like death the next day. Then again, a celebration like that had its reasons. The last time I'd been to a party like that was back in college, when you didn't have to say goodbye to friends for months, or even years, at a time. After a few minutes of reflection, I decided to go for a short walk. The dizziness had thankfully passed. I got dressed without any trouble and went outside, nodding to Slava, who was tinkering with his car. I quickly looked down, feeling embarrassed after what he'd seen last night. I walked over to the park and called the guys who had been at the bar with me. Some were still asleep and didn't answer. Zhenya, clearly still hungover, told me where to go. Only Misha was up for a normal conversation. We had a good laugh, remembering Yura who climbed onto the bar and Gosha who tried to dance with the cleaning lady. Eventually, Misha said goodbye to get on with his day. I had had enough of my walk, too, so I turned back towards home. Looking at my room with a sober eye, a wave of sadness washed over me when I saw a photo of Sveta and me standing in front of the Eiffel Tower. Our paths had diverged shortly after that trip to France, but I still had warm feelings for her. And then, I suddenly remembered the knock. I dropped to my knees and peered under the bed. There was nothing but a small dust bunny near the leg. "You drunken idiot," I chuckled to myself and got back up. My vacation had just started, and I was already bored. I decided to spend the rest of the day doing chores. Until evening, I did nothing but clean. I washed the floors, the windows, the toilet, the sink, and all the furniture. By nightfall, everything was sparkling. Pleased with myself, I opened a can of beer and sat down in front of the TV. Some local comedy was on. I smiled and sipped the cold drink, still not quite believing I had the whole week to myself. When the movie ended, I noticed the clock hands were well past midnight. Time for bed. After finishing my nightly routine, I flopped onto the bed and closed my eyes. I woke up to moonlight shining directly in my eyes. Damn it, I cursed. Forgot to close the curtains. I checked the time on my phone. 2:55 a.m. Whatever, I sighed, got up to draw the curtains, and lay back down. My eyes felt heavy, and I was just about to drift off to sleep when I heard a rustling sound from under the bed. No, it was more of a scratching, as if someone had dragged a fingernail across the floor. Trying not to make a sound, I reached for my phone on the edge of the nightstand. Just as quietly, I unlocked it, turned on the flashlight, and quickly shone it under the bed. "What the hell," was all I managed to whisper before I scrambled for the door. I slammed it shut, ran into the bathroom, turned on the light, and locked myself inside. I sank onto the toilet seat and covered my face with my hands. "This can't be real, this can't be real," I muttered to myself, but it was real. It existed, and no matter how much I tried to convince myself it was a lie, I couldn't calm down. She, the woman with the long black hair. She was dressed all in black, in what looked like a robe that covered her whole body. The flashlight beam had illuminated her face. I saw two yellow, cat-like eyes. And then she smiled. Perfectly white, even teeth appeared right in front of my face. I dropped my phone and locked myself in the bathroom. "Oh God," I whispered, "help me." I don't know how long I sat there on the toilet lid, reciting every prayer I could remember or invent. But when I finally fell silent, I realized it was just as quiet outside my hiding spot. No knocking, no scratching. Nothing. That woman couldn't have been a figment of my imagination. I had caught almost every detail, even though I'd only seen her for a couple of seconds. She was definitely lying there, looking at me. Smiling. But how? And when? How long had she been under my bed? And how did she get there? Panic alternated with reason. One moment I was shivering, the next I was on the verge of tears, and then I was lost in thought. Eventually, I realized that despite what I had seen under the bed, I still needed to sleep. I leaned my head against the door and closed my eyes, flinching at the slightest noise but eventually drifting off. When I felt I had gotten enough sleep, I started thinking about what to do next. Leave the bathroom? What if she was standing right outside the door, waiting for me to come out? But I couldn't sit in there forever. I grabbed the mop from the corner, turned it so the handle was pointing forward, and thought, on the count of 3, I opened the door. Whatever happens, happens. 1, 2, 3. I turned the lock and threw the door open, thrusting the mop handle out in front of me, but it met only air. No one was there. Sunlight streamed into the hallway, and I could see part of my apartment, including my bedroom door. It was still closed. I don't know what came over me, but instead of running out of the apartment as fast as I could, I moved toward the closed door. I repeated the same maneuver, throwing the bedroom door open with the mop handle extended. To my relief, that room was empty too. I really didn't want to do it, but I found the strength to look under the bed. Empty. Unconvinced, I pulled the bed away from the wall and examined every inch of it and the wall for any kind of opening. There were none. My first thought was that I was losing my mind, but I quickly dismissed that idea. I decided to search the entire apartment one more time, opening every closet and cabinet, for clothes, for books, for kitchenware. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I knew the terrifying woman might have just been a bad dream or a side effect of the beer, but at the same time, I knew I couldn't survive another night alone in that apartment. I started trying to figure out what to do. Staying with friends was a bad idea. That would only delay solving this terrifying mystery. So, I decided to invite someone over. But, as luck would have it, all my friends were busy or out of town that day. Even Misha apologized and asked if we could reschedule. In desperation, I called an escort service and booked a prostitute for the night. I hated spending that much money, but I saw no other way out. After buying some chocolates from the store, I waited for darkness to fall. At 11 p.m., the doorbell rang. A tall, slender woman who looked to be about 25 was standing on my doorstep. She playfully set her purse on the entryway table and touched my neck. "Where can I wash up?" she asked softly. "Come on, I'll show you," I replied anxiously. I wasn't nervous about having hired a prostitute. What terrified me was the thought of what the night might bring. I obviously wasn't in the mood for pleasure. I was just hoping for a shared sleep. "I'm Zana," the woman said as she came out of the bathroom. "Nice to meet you," I smiled. "Are you hungry?" "I wouldn't say no," Zana said, giving me a quick kiss on the lips. I went to the kitchen to get the chocolates and 2 glasses of wine. By the time I returned, she had already unbuttoned her blouse in my bedroom. I set the food on my desk and turned to her. "Listen," I started. "Yes, my handsome," she smiled. "Tonight, I'm not ready for this," I said firmly. What do you mean? The smile vanished from her face. Then why did I come here? You'll get your money, don't worry, I replied. I just want someone to talk to be with. Whatever you say, Zana said thoughtfully, buttoning up her blouse. She lay down on the bed. I turned off the light and got in next to her. Was it really worth spending so much money just to talk? She asked. Sometimes I don't have anyone to talk to, I lied. And I just crave some company. I get it, Zana replied. I've had times like that in my life, too. She told me about her difficult life, and I listened, straining to hear any sounds from under the bed. But all was quiet. When Zana finished her story, she asked, "What's got you so tense again?" Her next offer was cut short by a quiet tapping from under the bed. My heart sank into my stomach, and I pressed myself against the wall. What was that? The girl asked, surprised. Nothing. Neighbors doing renovations, I answered quietly. Let's just get some sleep. Zana nodded and pressed her body against mine, but my mind was elsewhere. I knew we weren't alone. That horrible creature was here, right now, lying under my bed and making noises. But I couldn't just run to the bathroom like last night. I had to stay put and wait for morning. Zana soon started to snore softly, but I couldn't close my eyes, listening intently to the silence. Periodically, a tapping, a rustling, or a scratching would come from under the bed, making my heart pound at a monstrous rate. I waited for the dawn, convinced that only sunlight could banish the creature back to wherever it came from. 5 hours of motionless waiting passed. Finally, the first ray of sunlight pierced the room, then a second, then a third. The tapping stopped. I quietly climbed over Zana and looked under the bed. Nothing. The girl opened her eyes and smiled. I should probably go, she whispered in my ear. Yeah, of course. I said my goodbyes and paid her from my wallet. Thanks for the night, Zana said, giving me a final peck on the cheek. I locked the door behind her and went back to my room. By day, I was safe. But the night was controlled by her. And I didn't know how much longer she would lie under my bed. What if, sooner or later, she decided to come out? What then? Would I go insane? Or worse? As I mulled it over, a plan began to form in my head. It wasn't perfect, but it was rational. I got a saw from my toolbox and approached the bed. I made cuts in all 4 legs, then carefully lay down. I gave a sharp jerk, and the bed crashed to the floor with a loud thud. Perfect. I set the bed back on its legs and waited for night. I wondered if there was anything about this on the internet. I scrolled through websites related to my problem but only found campfire stories. Unfortunately, my story was happening in real life. Soon, the moon appeared outside my window. Mustering my courage, I turned off all the lights in the apartment and carefully lay down on the bed so it wouldn't collapse prematurely. Just wait, I whispered. It all ends tonight. As usual, around the middle of the night, I heard the familiar scratching. Scratch away, scratch all you want, I thought. Then I jerked sharply. The bed slid off its legs and slammed onto the floor. The first thing I felt was the mattress bulging upward from below. So I was right. It wasn't an illusion. The creature was real. Then came a shriek from under the bed. A sound like a trumpeting elephant mixed with the scream of a small child. The shriek lasted only a few seconds, then fell silent. The mattress flattened out, and I was left lying on a level surface. At first, I didn't know what to do. Then I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and shined the light under the bed. It was a sight both gratifying and horrifying. There was finally nothing under the bed, but a huge puddle of dark red blood was spreading out from underneath it, as if I had just slaughtered a pig. The blood smelled like sewage, and I covered my nose to keep from gagging. I didn't dare touch the liquid. Still in shock, I sat on the bed for a few more minutes, staring into space. Then I leapt over the puddle and ran to the kitchen. I took a clean cup from the cabinet and scooped some of the liquid into it. I grabbed my phone and dialed Misha's number. After several long rings, he finally picked up. "Vic, are you out of your mind?" he asked. "It's 3 in the morning. Misha, I'm sorry," I stammered. "Can you go with me to a lab tomorrow?" What lab?" he grumbled. "I need to get some samples tested urgently," I said. "Can you do it? To a lab?" "Definitely not," Misha answered sadly. "It's not open right now." He paused to think. "Bring it to my place. I'll take a look at it myself." "Misha, thank you so much." I was overjoyed. "When can you come by?" "Let's say 5 a.m., he replied wearily. "I'm in no condition to work right now." "Deal," I confirmed and hung up. Misha worked as a lab technician and had his own small laboratory at home where he spent his free time. I couldn't go to anyone else, it would sound ridiculous at best. So, I crushed a woman who appeared under my bed every night, and now I want to know who she was. Of course, I could just forget about it forever, clean up the blood, and go on with my life, leaving the woman in black in the past. But who could guarantee that the creature was dead and not just gone, like she was every morning? What if I had only angered her, and tonight she would decide to act? I had to find out as soon as possible. I sat for hours, waiting for the right time. The blood had spread across the floor and dried. The cup with the dark liquid stood on the table next to me. Finally, when the clock showed 4:30, I got ready, covered the cup with a cloth, and headed to Mish's. He met me in his bathrobe and led me into the apartment. We went into his small lab. A desk covered with all sorts of flasks, a bed, a nightstand with some instruments on it, and a stool. That was pretty much everything in the room. "Okay, what did you bring?" Misha said. I showed him the cup. He looked at me, astonished. "Where did you get a cup of blood?" "It doesn't matter," I replied. "I'm just asking you to find out what this is. I'll tell you everything, but later." "Alright, fine," Misha said, taking the cup. "Why does it stink so bad?" He wrinkled his nose. "You didn't happen to kill someone, did you?" "Of course not. What are you talking about?" I laughed nervously, even though I knew that, in essence, I had. The question was who, or what, I had killed. "Okay, Vic," Misha sighed. "Any risk is on you. And listen, I can't work when someone's standing over my shoulder." Of course, I agreed. "I'll come back later. I'll call you this evening," Misha reassured me. "Thanks again," I said and left the apartment. It was a good thing Misha was still half asleep. Otherwise, he would have bombarded me with questions. Luckily, I managed to leave before he fully woke up. I had no desire to go home to that pool of blood, so I headed to the park. On the way, I ran into Slava, who was returning from the store. "Vic," he started, "what was all that noise last night?" My neighbor asked, surprised. "Sorry, Slava," I joked. I dropped a chair. "Alright. Well, be more careful," Slava said, clapping me on the shoulder before heading towards our building. I sat down on a bench, put in my headphones, and turned on some calming music. It had been a long time since I'd felt so relaxed. I leaned my head back and dozed off as a warm breeze blew across my face. My blissful state was interrupted by a phone call. "Vic, get over here, now. Now," Misha said. His voice unnerved me. I had never heard my friend sound so frantic. I could almost picture him hopping on one leg from nerves. "I'm on my way," I said and broke into a run towards his building. "Can you tell me what's going on?" "When you get here," he replied and hung up. I ran all the way to Misha's building. A young woman held the main door open for me. I bolted up to the 5th floor and rang the bell, but Misha didn't rush to open it. I rang again, but it was silent on the other side of the door. I swore under my breath and called his phone. The automated voice of an operator greeted me. "The subscriber is temporarily unavailable." I sat down on the steps, then rang the doorbell again, holding the button down for several minutes, but it was no use. I had never felt so awful in my life. Even the woman under the bed seemed less frightening than what I was going through now. I had just been talking to Misha on the phone. There was no other choice. I took out my phone and called the police. The local officer arrived with 2 locksmiths. He listened to my story about how my friend seemed to have vanished in a short period, cutting off all contact with the outside world. "Get started," the officer told the locksmiths. They began drilling the lock on the door while the officer stepped away to make a phone call. A few minutes later, 2 of his colleagues came up to the landing, waiting for the door to be opened. After a few more minutes, the lock was broken. The officer, his 2 assistants, and I behind them, entered the apartment. We went through the hallway toward the lab. Misha had turned off all the lights for some reason, so we had to turn them on as we went. He didn't respond to his name, which only heightened the tense atmosphere. When we reached the lab door, we saw that it was closed. The officer grabbed the handle and threw it open. The flasks that had been on the desk were scattered all over the room. Their contents were on the floor, on the walls, and some had even splattered onto the ceiling. The desk had only 3 legs and was tilted to one side. The stool and the bed were overturned, and the instrument that had been on the nightstand was smashed. Misha was nowhere to be found. What could have happened here? The officer mused. He sent his assistants to search the rest of the apartment while he stayed with me in the lab. While he was on the phone calling for backup, I noticed 3 scratch marks on the desk. He tried to hold on, but he wasn't strong enough. My doubts vanished. It was her, 100%. The woman in black. She had somehow gotten in here. I grabbed my head and ran out of the apartment. The officer followed me. "Are you alright?" he asked, placing a hand on my shoulder. Yes, of course," I whispered, turning away. I was trying to hold back tears. It was my fault my friend was hurt. I had no idea what happened to him, but I knew it was nothing good. She had finally come out from under the bed and taken him. She must have realized Misha could tell me the results of his analysis. Time seemed to slow down for me. More police officers arrived on the floor. The officer asked me to get into his patrol car. We drove towards my house, and then it hit me, the pool of blood. No one had cleaned it up. It was still there, dried and stinking on my floor. I asked the officer if we could just handle everything at the station, but he just shook his head. We stopped in front of my building. A couple of police officers followed the lead officer and me inside. As we climbed the stairs, a surprised-looking Slava passed us on his way down. I put the key in the lock and opened the door. I hadn't even had time to come up with an explanation for the blood and decided to just play it by ear. Who knows what would have happened if I hadn't crushed that terrifying creature with my bed. Maybe things could have been better. But now, it doesn't matter. A lot of time had passed since I was last in my own room, but what I saw next, I will never forget. The stain of dried blood was still on the floor, which was enough reason for the police to grab my arms. I was ready to tell them everything, but I fell silent the moment the officer lifted the bed. Misha was lying underneath it. It's been a month now, and I'm living in a cell with 2 other guys. One of them, Vasya, is in for theft. The other, Borya, is a murderer. But neither of them thinks I'm normal, not since they found out the details of my case. Misha was found lying in a pool of blood with his stomach torn open. The missing leg from his desk was almost entirely shoved into his mouth, with one end sticking out of his torn abdomen. His bones were shattered as if someone had crushed them with a bed. The blood that had pooled on the floor belonged to him. Who am I kidding? All the evidence pointed to me. At first, they thought I was insane, but since I acted normally, they proceeded to trial. The court gave me the harshest sentence, life in prison. I had no defense, so I didn't even mention the woman in the black robe. Life in prison is hard, but it's calm. Now I don't fear for my life, not when I have 2 big guys living in the cell with me. The funny thing is, I was wrong again. After a month here, I heard a quiet knock from under my bunk. I told my cellmates about it, but they just kicked me in the stomach. They can't hear the woman in black. Only I can see and hear her. She wants me. Last night, I saw her reach her black, mangled hand out from under the bed. There is no escape from here. I convinced a guard to give me a pen and a notebook. I will write as long as no one is watching. I hope maybe this text will help someone. But know this. If the woman in black has come for you, you can't be saved.